Officer James Sullivan drummed his fingers against the steering wheel of his patrol car, watching autumn leaves spiral across Maple Avenue. The street lights cast a warm glow over the pristine lawns of Oak Hills Estate, where houses stood like silent sentinels in the gathering dusk. After 12 years on the force, Friday evening patrols had become as familiar as his morning coffee. The dashboard clock read 8:43 p.m. when a sleek charcoal gray Mercedes caught his attention. The car made a fluid turn at the intersection, moving with purpose through the quiet neighborhood. Sullivan straightened in his seat, years of training kicking in as he observed the vehicle's movement. Something about the driver's swift navigation through the residential area triggered his instincts. Inside the Mercedes, Dr. Marcus Thompson fought exhaustion, his mind replaying the intricate details of the triple bypass surgery he completed just an hour ago. The young patient's heart had nearly given out twice, but Thompson's steady hands and decades of experience had prevailed. Now, all he wanted was to sink into his favorite leather armchair and savor a cup of chamomile tea. Sullivan eased his patrol car into motion, following at a measured distance. The Mercedes driver maintained perfect speed, but Sullivan's trained eye noticed something at the last intersection. A turn that seemed just a touch too smooth, as if the stop sign had been more of a suggestion than a requirement. Blue and red lights pierced the evening calm. Dr. Thompson checked his rearview mirror, his surgeon's composure masking his surprise. He guided his car to a perfect stop, positioning it well away from the curb as years of civic-mindedness had taught him. His hands settled at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, muscle memory from decades of precise movements in the operating room. Evening, Sullivan approached the driver's side window, flashlight beam sweeping across the immaculate interior. "License and registration, please." Dr. Thompson's voice carried the same measured tone he used to deliver both good and difficult news to patients' families. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I'm being stopped?" His hand moved slowly, deliberately toward his glove compartment. "You rolled through the stop sign back there at Oakwood and Pine," Sullivan replied, noting the driver's expensive suit, the gold watch glinting at his wrist. "In a bit of a hurry tonight, sir?" A faint smile crossed Dr. Thompson's tired features. "I've just finished a 12-hour shift at City General, emergency triple bypass surgery. I assure you, after that kind of precision work, I'm quite careful about following all rules of the road." Sullivan's flashlight beam lingered on the hospital ID clipped to Dr. Thompson's lab coat draped across the passenger seat. Something about the situation made him pause. The immaculate car, the professional demeanor, the obvious signs of medical credentials. Yet years of training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt off about this seemingly routine stop. Neither man could have known in that moment how this simple interaction would cascade into events that would challenge their perspectives, reshape their understanding, and ultimately lead to profound changes in both their lives. The autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across Maple Avenue, nature's quiet witness to this pivotal encounter just beginning to unfold. The beam of Sullivan's flashlight traced across Dr. Thompson's credentials, illuminating degrees from prestigious medical schools and his attending surgeon badge from City General. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of hospital antiseptic from the doctor's clothes, a subtle reminder of his recent life-saving work. "Step out of the vehicle, please," Sullivan requested, his training prompting him to maintain control of the situation. He noticed Dr. Thompson's slight exhale, not quite a sigh, but a breath that carried the weight of his exhausting day. Dr. Thompson complied with measured movements, his athletic frame unfolding from the luxury sedan. Standing at his full height, he cut an impressive figure in his custom-tailored suit, though fatigue softened his usually sharp features. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I assure you—" "Sir, I noticed some medical equipment in your vehicle," Sullivan interrupted, his flashlight beam catching the glint of metal in the center console. "Could you explain that?" A look of understanding crossed Dr. Thompson's face. "Of course, that's my personal surgical kit. I often carry it between the hospital and my home office. Each instrument is registered and logged with City General. His voice remained steady, carrying the same calm authority he used to guide his surgical team through complex procedures. Sullivan's hand instinctively moved closer to his belt. "I'll need to check that kit, sir. Protocol for any potential weapons." The corner of Dr. Thompson's mouth twitched, not in anger, but in recognition of a familiar scenario. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and retrieved his phone. "Officer, I'll be recording this interaction for both our safety. I'm also going to call Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief of Surgery, to verify my credentials." As Dr. Thompson dialed, Sullivan noticed the distinctive ring on his right hand, a simple platinum band with a subtle inscription. It wasn't flashy, but it spoke of refinement and achievement. The same kind of ring Sullivan's father, a retired judge, wore. "Sarah?" "Yes, I apologize for calling so late." Dr. Thompson's voice carried effortlessly through the night air. "I'm currently being detained by officer." He paused, glancing at Sullivan's nameplate. "Sullivan, who needs verification of my identity and medical equipment." Sullivan listened as a crisp, professional voice emanated from the phone's speaker, confirming not only Dr. Thompson's identity, but his recent surgical achievement. "Dr. Thompson just completed a groundbreaking procedure, officer. He's personally pioneered the technique that saved our patient's life tonight." The atmosphere shifted subtly. Sullivan found himself caught between protocol and growing awareness. The surgical kit, which moments ago had triggered his suspicion, now seemed as natural as a teacher carrying textbooks or a chef transporting knives. Dr. Thompson ended the call with quiet dignity. "Officer, I understand the need for caution in your line of work. Every day, I also make decisions that affect people's lives. Perhaps we can approach this situation with mutual professional respect." The words hung in the air between them, a bridge offering connection rather than confrontation. In that moment, both men stood at a crossroads, one that would lead them down an unexpected path of discovery, challenging their assumptions and ultimately reshaping their understanding of power, respect, and justice. Morning sunlight streamed through the precinct windows as Officer Sullivan settled at his desk, steam rising from his coffee cup. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he prepared to file his report from the previous night's interaction. The encounter with Dr. Thompson had left him with an unsettling mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. "Sullivan." Captain Martinez's voice cut through the morning bustle. "My office now." Walking into the captain's office, Sullivan noticed the morning's newspaper spread across the desk. The headline caught his eye. "Federal Judge Thompson saves child's life in revolutionary surgery." His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the distinguished face in the photograph, the same man he'd stopped last night. "Sit down, James," Martinez said, her tone carefully neutral. "Tell me about your traffic stop last night on Maple Avenue." Sullivan's mouth felt dry as he recounted the details. The stop sign, the surgical kit, the phone call to the chief of surgery. Each element of the story took on new weight as he spoke. "The driver you stopped," Martinez began, sliding the newspaper across her desk, "is federal judge Marcus Thompson. He's not just any judge. He's the youngest person ever appointed to our district court, and he just pioneered a surgical technique that's going to save thousands of lives." The revelation hit Sullivan like a physical force. Images from last night replayed in his mind. The platinum ring similar to his father's, the dignified composure, the precise way Judge Thompson had handled the entire interaction. He'd been face to face with one of the most influential legal minds in the state, and he hadn't known it. "There's more," Martinez continued, pulling up an email on her computer. "Judge Thompson's clerk sent this over this morning. Instead of filing a formal complaint, the judge has invited you to observe his courtroom this week. He's presiding over the Johnson case." Sullivan knew the Johnson case, a complex civil rights matter that had been making headlines. The invitation wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. But for what? As if reading his thoughts, Martinez leaned forward. "James, do you know why I became a police captain? Because 20 years ago, Judge Thompson, then a public defender, took the time to show me that true justice requires understanding all perspectives. He has a way of turning challenging moments into valuable lessons. Sullivan's coffee grew cold on the desk as Captain Martinez shared more about Judge Thompson's reputation, his dedication to mentoring young lawyers, his volunteer surgical work at community clinics, his establishment of a youth education program in underserved neighborhoods. This could have gone very differently, Martinez concluded. The judge could have made things difficult for you, for the department. Instead, he's offering something more valuable than any reprimand. Sullivan stood at the office window, watching the city wake up. Somewhere across town, Judge Thompson was likely preparing for court, perhaps reviewing case files or scrubbing in for another surgery. Two very different worlds of public service, about to intersect in ways neither man could fully anticipate. "I'll observe his courtroom," Sullivan decided, his voice firm with newfound purpose. The morning sun caught the badge on his chest, its gleam a reminder of the responsibility he carried, not just to enforce the law, but to understand the complex tapestry of the community he served. Sullivan sat in his parked car outside the federal courthouse, 15 minutes early for his observation of Judge Thompson's courtroom. His research over the past few days had revealed an extraordinary career path he'd never imagined during that evening traffic stop. The morning newspaper lay folded on his passenger seat, featuring a follow-up story about Judge Thompson's groundbreaking surgery. The young patient, a 12-year-old aspiring artist, had already begun sketching again from her hospital bed. The article mentioned that the judge had stopped by during his lunch break, bringing her a professional sketching set. Taking a deep breath, Sullivan straightened his tie and walked through the courthouse security. The guard, noticing his police badge, nodded with professional courtesy. "Judge Thompson's courtroom, 3rd floor, end of the hall. Can't miss it. It's the one with the line of law students taking notes." True to the guard's words, a group of eager law students huddled outside courtroom 3A, notebooks in hand. Their excited whispers painted a picture Sullivan hadn't expected. "He asks the best questions," one student murmured. "The way he connects legal precedent to real-world impact. It's brilliant," added another. Inside, Sullivan found a seat in the back row, just as Judge Thompson entered through his chamber's door. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was any trace of the exhausted surgeon from that Friday night. In his judicial robes, Thompson commanded the room with quiet authority, his presence drawing everyone to attention without a word being spoken. "Good morning," Judge Thompson's voice carried clearly through the courtroom. "Today we're hearing arguments in the Miller property dispute. I remind all parties that in this courtroom, we seek not just the letter of the law, but its spirit in service to justice." Sullivan watched, fascinated, as Judge Thompson navigated complex legal arguments with the same precision he'd likely used in surgery. He asked penetrating questions that cut to the heart of each issue, but his manner remained patient, almost teaching. When a young attorney stumbled over her words, Thompson guided her back to her key points with gentle prompts that helped her shine. During a brief recess, Sullivan overheard two attorneys discussing the judge's morning schedule. Can you believe he was at the hospital at 5 a.m. for rounds, then reviewed briefs during his train ride here? The man never stopped serving. The revelation hit Sullivan hard. Judge Thompson hadn't been making excuses that night about his hospital shift. He'd been living his commitment to public service across multiple fields, pushing himself to excel in ways that helped others. As the afternoon session began, Sullivan noticed something he'd missed earlier. On Judge Thompson's bench sat a small framed photo of a teenage boy in a graduation gown. The inscription beneath read, "To the mentor who showed me anything is possible." It was signed by a former defendant from Thompson's early days as a judge, whom he helped redirect toward education instead of incarceration. The day's proceedings wound down, and Sullivan remained in his seat, processing everything he'd witnessed. The judge's chamber's door opened once more, and Thompson emerged in his suit, carrying a medical bag. Their eyes met briefly across the courtroom, and Thompson gave a small, knowing nod. In that moment, Sullivan understood that this wasn't just about one traffic stop or even about one judge. It was about seeing the full measure of each person's potential, their capacity to serve, to excel, to transform lives, including his own. 2 weeks later, Sullivan found himself back in Courtroom 3A, this time not as an observer, but as a witness in an unrelated case. His palms felt unusually damp as he straightened his dress uniform. The familiar weight of his badge offered little comfort as he waited to be called. The courtroom buzzed with its usual energy. Lawyers shuffling papers, clerks moving efficiently between desks, the soft murmur of whispered conversations. Sullivan noticed small details he'd missed during his observation day. The way sunlight painted geometric patterns through the tall windows, the slight creak of the gallery doors, the distinct tap of Judge Thompson's gavel marking each transition. "The state calls Officer James Sullivan," the prosecutor announced. Sullivan rose, his footsteps echoing as he approached the witness stand. As he turned to face the courtroom, his eyes met Judge Thompson's for the first time since that night on Maple Avenue. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," the clerk requested. "Officer James Sullivan, 12 years with the City Police Department," he responded, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. Judge Thompson's expression remained neutral, professional, the same composed demeanor he'd shown during their first encounter. The questioning began, focusing on a routine arrest Sullivan had made in a drug possession case. As he testified, Sullivan found himself applying the same careful attention to detail he'd observed in Judge Thompson's surgical kit inspection. Each answer was precise, thoughtful, supported by his notes and memory. "Officer Sullivan," Judge Thompson spoke directly to him for the first time, his tone carrying no hint of their previous meeting. "Could you clarify the sequence of events that led to your discovery of the evidence?" Sullivan took a breath, remembering how Thompson had maintained his composure during their roadside encounter. "Yes, Your Honor," he began, then methodically laid out the timeline, his testimony reflecting the same professional respect he'd been shown. Throughout the questioning, Judge Thompson's interventions were pointed but fair, seeking clarity rather than confrontation. His questions demonstrated a deep understanding of police procedure while gently probing for constitutional considerations, teaching moments wrapped in inquiry. During a brief sidebar with the attorneys, Sullivan noticed a newspaper on the judge's bench. The headline announced another successful surgery by Dr. Thompson, this time a pro bono operation on a retired teacher. Even amid a full court docket, the judge was balancing both of his callings. As Sullivan stepped down from the witness stand, Judge Thompson addressed him one final time. "Thank you for your clear and thorough testimony, Officer Sullivan. Your attention to detail serves the court well." The words carried a weight beyond their surface meaning, an acknowledgement of growth, of lessons learned. Later, as the courtroom emptied for lunch recess, Sullivan lingered, watching Judge Thompson consult with his clerks. A young intern rushed in, carrying medical journals along with legal briefs. Thompson's ability to seamlessly navigate both worlds, healing bodies in the operating room and mending justice in the courtroom, struck Sullivan with renewed admiration. As he turned to leave, Sullivan caught his reflection in the courtroom's wooden panels. His uniform, badge, and posture were the same as that night on Maple Avenue, but something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of service, authority, and the countless ways one person could work to make the world better. The story of Officer Sullivan and Judge Thompson's encounters spread through the city's professional circles in unexpected ways. It wasn't the typical narrative people might have expected. Instead, it became a testament to dignity, growth, and mutual respect. Sullivan sat in the police station's break room, reviewing applications for a new mentorship program he proposed. The idea had come to him after watching Judge Thompson guide that struggling young attorney in court. On the wall behind him hung a framed article from the City Times. Local judge bridges gaps between law enforcement and medical excellence. "Your program proposal is impressive," Captain Martinez said, sliding into the chair across from him. She picked up one of the applications, scanning its contents. 20 senior officers have already volunteered to mentor academy recruits. The commissioner called it innovative. Sullivan nodded, thinking back to his own academy days. I realized something watching Judge Thompson in court. Excellence isn't just about doing your job well. It's about lifting others up along the way. The break room television caught their attention as a familiar face appeared on the morning news. Judge Thompson stood outside City General Hospital, discussing a new medical-legal partnership he'd established. The program would provide legal support to patients facing healthcare access challenges. "That's why we serve," Thompson was saying on screen, his surgical scrubs visible under his suit jacket. "Every person who walks through these doors, whether it's a hospital or a courtroom, deserves to be seen for their full potential." Sullivan's phone buzzed with a text from Officer Chen, a rookie he'd recently taken under his wing. "Just finished my first solo night patrol. Remembered what you said about looking beyond first impressions. Made a difference tonight." The station's front desk officer appeared in the doorway. "Sullivan, there's someone here to see you." Looking up, Sullivan found himself face to face with Sarah Chen, the chief of surgery who'd verified Judge Thompson's credentials that fateful night. "Officer Sullivan," she smiled warmly. "I'm here about the Joint Training Initiative. Judge Thompson suggested you might be interested in helping develop the communication workshop between medical staff and law enforcement." The proposal she outlined was elegant in its simplicity. Regular rotations where officers would shadow hospital staff and medical students would observe police work, building understanding between those who serve the public in different uniforms. Later that afternoon, Sullivan drove past the spot on Maple Avenue where it had all begun. A new sign stood at the intersection. "Drive with care. Hospital staff and emergency responders frequent route." The sign had been Judge Thompson's suggestion to the city council, a small but meaningful change. At a local diner, Sullivan overheard two elderly gentlemen discussing recent changes in the city. "Did you hear about that police officer and the judge? Now there's a story worth telling. My grandson's in the academy, and he said they're using it as a case study in their training." The setting sun cast long shadows across Sullivan's desk as he finished the day's paperwork. A memo from the department's training division sat in his inbox, requesting his input on updating protocols for professional interactions. Beside it lay an invitation to speak at the police academy's upcoming graduation ceremony. On his way out, Sullivan passed the station's mission statement, recently updated with words that echoed his own journey: to serve with wisdom, to protect with understanding, to honor every story. The old words had spoken of authority, the new ones spoke of growth. The mahogany doors of Judge Thompson's chambers carry the quiet weight of history. Sullivan stood before them, invitation letter in hand, his reflection in the polished nameplate showing a man different from the officer who had made that traffic stop months ago. "Come in, Officer Sullivan." Thompson's voice welcomed him. The judge's chambers surprised Sullivan. Instead of the austere formality he'd expected, the room felt alive with purpose. Medical journals shared shelf space with legal texts, and a child's thank you drawing hung beside his judicial credentials. "Thank you for meeting with me, Your Honor," Sullivan began, but Thompson raised a gentle hand. "Please in here, it's Marcus. Would you like some coffee?" "Sarah," Dr. Chen, introduced me to this remarkable Ethiopian blend. Thompson moved to a small coffee station, his movements carrying the same precision Sullivan had noticed that first night. "James then," Sullivan replied, accepting the offered cup. "I've been following your recent cases. The way you handled the Wilson education reform suit was enlightening." Thompson smiled, gesturing to a comfortable seating area near the window. "Interesting choice of word. Enlightening. That's what this profession should be about, isn't it? Whether we're enlightening minds in court or illuminating dark spots in our own understanding." Through the window, they could see the city stretching toward the horizon, the hospital where Thompson performed surgeries, the streets Sullivan patrolled, the neighborhoods they both served in different ways. "That night on Maple Avenue," Thompson began, his tone reflective rather than accusatory, "I saw something familiar in your approach. The same instinct for precision I use in surgery, the same dedication to procedure I apply in court. But precision without perspective can blind us to the bigger picture." Sullivan nodded, remembering his observations in Thompson's courtroom. I've learned that authority means nothing without understanding. Watching you balance both careers, it's shown me how true service transcends any single role. They discussed their shared experiences of responsibility. Thompson's double duty as healer and judge, Sullivan's role as both protector and mentor. The conversation flowed naturally to their hopes for the future of public service. My father was a janitor at City General, Thompson shared, surprising Sullivan. He taught me that every person in a building, from the cleaning staff to the chief surgeon, plays a vital role in saving lives. The same is true in our justice system. Sullivan found himself sharing stories of his own father, the retired judge whose reign he'd noticed that first night. He always said a good judge sees the law, but a great judge sees the people affected by it. Your mentorship program, Thompson leaned forward, genuine interest in his eyes. It's exactly the kind of bridge we need. Would you consider expanding it to include pre-med students? I've been thinking about ways to help future doctors understand the communities they'll serve. The afternoon light shifted as they explored ideas, their initial encounter transforming into a foundation for meaningful change. They discussed plans for joint training sessions, community outreach programs, and ways to bring their respective professions closer to the people they served. As their meeting drew to a close, Thompson retrieved a book from his shelf, Medical Ethics and Legal Practice, Bridging Two Worlds. Inside, he'd written a simple dedication, to James, a fellow seeker of truth and understanding. Your dedication to growth honors both our professions. 1 year later, Sullivan stood at the podium in the Police Academy's graduation hall, looking out at the eager faces of new recruits. The room buzzed with energy, filled with family members, veteran officers, and distinguished guests. Among them sat Judge Thompson, who had just finished his keynote address. When I began my career 12 years ago, Sullivan started, his voice carrying clear and confident, I thought I knew exactly what made an excellent officer. Today, I stand before you with a different understanding of excellence. In the front row, Officer Chen, now a training coordinator, nodded encouragingly. The success of their mentorship program had exceeded all expectations, with over 50 senior officers now paired with recruits and medical students. True excellence isn't just about following procedures perfectly, Sullivan continued, gesturing to a wall where photos showcased joint training sessions between police cadets and medical students. It's about seeing the full story of every person we encounter. Through the grand windows, morning sunlight illuminated the newly established Community Service Center across the street, a collaborative project between the police department and City General Hospital. The center offered medical care, legal aid, and community outreach programs, embodying the bridge-building philosophy that had grown from that fateful traffic stop. Last week, Sullivan shared, I watched Judge Marcus Thompson perform life-saving surgery on a young man who once sat in his courtroom. Yesterday, that same judge presided over a case where lives were changed through understanding rather than punishment. These moments remind us that our greatest impact often comes from looking beyond our initial assumptions. The ceremony continued with the presentation of awards. A new honor had been added this year, the Thompson-Sullivan Excellence in Service Award, given to recruits who demonstrated outstanding commitment to community understanding. The first recipient, a former emergency room nurse turned police officer, embodied the program's ideals. After the ceremony, Sullivan found himself in the garden outside, where Officer Chen was showing medical students the basics of community policing. Judge Thompson joined him, both men watching the next generation embrace their vision of integrated public service. Did you ever imagine, Thompson asked, that one traffic stop would lead to all this? Sullivan smiled, remembering the nervous officer he'd been that night on Maple Avenue. Sometimes the best lessons come when we least expect them, he replied. They walked together through the academy grounds, passing training rooms where cadets now learned alongside medical students, understanding each other's roles in serving their community. The walls displayed photographs of successful collaborations, officers assisting at health fairs, medical students participating in community policing initiatives. At the academy's entrance, a new motto had been inscribed: to protect, to serve, to understand. Below it hung a simple black and white photograph of Maple Avenue at dusk, marking the spot where two different paths of public service had intersected and created something remarkable. The real transformation, Thompson observed, watching a group of recruits engage with visiting medical professionals, isn't in the programs we've created. It's in the mindset these young people will carry forward. Sullivan nodded, thinking of all the lives that would be touched by this new approach to public service. The next generation would start their careers with the understanding that had taken him years to develop, that every encounter carried the potential for positive change, and every person's story deserved to be fully seen and heard. As they parted ways, Thompson headed to court, Sullivan to supervise afternoon training. Both men carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing that their story had become more than a personal lesson. It had grown into a legacy of understanding, one that would continue to shape their city's future, one interaction at a time.